Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein.
Putin bombing innocent civilians in Ukraine. Where are the protests in America? Okay, so Trump has not had much progress with the key campaign promise. In fact, both Hamas still hold hostages and Ukraine is still being bombed. On Israel, Trump has been quiet on the removal of Hamas. However, it is still painfully slow. Israel has been held back regarding Iran due to what I believe will be pointless negotiations with the terrorists running Iran. Time to bomb their nuke program back to the 8th century. Ukraine made the rare earth deal with the United States. Trump told Putin to clean it up, and he has instead sent record numbers of drones and missiles to wreak destruction on civilians. Time for the USA and Europe to arm Ukraine to the teeth and finally cause enough casualties that the good people in Russia toss out this deranged murderer. An additional observation is that the proof that the pro-Hamas protests are simply anti-Semitism is that these same clowns are not protesting the number of civilians in Ukraine being slaughtered. Remember, just like Israel, Ukraine did not start the conflict that it has found itself in. Seattle, how to ruin a great city. Some years ago, I attended a conference in Seattle. I had a nice time. I did observe that there were a lot of street people, however. Since then, the city has gone into the dumpster and continues to decline. Reports are that they are short on effective policing due to anti-police policies and that the streets are unsafe. Recently, a religious group held two quiet events with proper permits in Seattle. Each time, terrorists violently attacked them. The understaffed police managed to arrest 23 of them across the two events. No telling if there will be any real punishment, especially when the scumball mayor claims that the pro-life group was at fault for this event. 85% of the people in Seattle are Democrats. I can call on complete boycott of the city until the education level and the safety improves. On the plus side, Trump appointed FBI Director Dan Bongino has announced an investigation into targeted violence against religious groups by the city. Hey, maybe the feds will get something done if the locals don't. Tariff chaos shifts into high gear. As the world disorder and reactions to Trump multiple tariffs and then backing off many of those tariffs continues, it gets even crazier. That's right. The U.S. Court of International Trade ruled that Congress, not Trump, controls most of the tariffs involved. This means a trip through the Federal Appeals Court and then likely SCOTUS. The alternative would have to be Congress fixing the situation, but unlikely to have a fix there with the very narrow margins in both houses of Congress. Even though this is important for the United States, it's very unlikely that the Dems will cooperate with the GOP to see if we can get something done right. Trump had relied on the authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. However, the court did not buy Trump's arguments on either emergency declarations or plenary authority on tariff applications. The Constitution assigns Congress the exclusive powers to lay and collect taxes, duties, imports, and excises, and to regulate commerce with foreign nations. A citation to the Constitution from the court. The question in the two cases before the court is whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 77 delegates these powers to the president in the form of authority to impose unlimited tariffs on goods from nearly every country in the world. The court does not read this statute to contest such unbounded authority and sets aside the challenged tariffs imposed thereunder. So the court concludes that Congress, not the president, has the power to control the tariff situation. This ruling seemed like the end of the big story on tariffs for Trump. Well, remember I mentioned whiplash recently? Yep, the Federal Appeals Court quickly stayed the order of the Court of International Trade. So Trump's tariffs live on, at least for now. I still think they are on the way to SCOTUS. Note, some tariffs are under different laws. They are not subject to the current round of court suits like those on autos, steel, and aluminum, which are some pretty important products that are not subject to the current court suits. It would be great if Congress would do something to help with the world imbalance in trading against the USA and take the issue out of the courts. You know what, folks? This might be a rare opportunity for the Democrats to cooperate with the GOP and prove they're not as stupid and revengeful as they appear to be. So let's see what happens, folks. But like I said, this tariff turmoil still continues. The real story on DEI. DEI is not dead, only hidden better. That is based on a report about some games being played at UNC. A recent article by John Sexton in Hot Air claims that there is undercover video from an office where Janet Sanders, an assistant director of leadership and community engagement at UNC Charlotte, is describing how things work since DEI was banned. She jokes about DEI being renamed. We've reorganized. We've recalibrated, so to speak. We don't have to call them diverse groups of people. We can just say everybody has a different stock of knowledge. At the same time, a recent article by my friend Ed Bloom and his co-author Adam Mortara it was published in the Wall Street Journal under their opinions section, and they describe an initiative by the Justice Department, which on May 19th announced the Civil Rights Fraud Initiative, which will use the False Claims Act, which encourages whistleblowers to come forward with evidence of illegal activities. Fines range from $14,000 to $30,000. And hey, as a bonus, people who are whistleblowers may get a piece of that action. So Americans, if you see the illegal discrimination continuing, take action. You might just get a piece of the action, as I just mentioned. And maybe we can help America be a more fair and equal place. A sad report from a place that I hadn't heard of before called Study Finds. That's right, the newsletter, just 2 words, had a report on the dog injuries and deaths from the last 3 years. Talks about this from a legal standpoint, is dog owners need to take responsibility, and they identified the 3 most dangerous breeds. And not surprisingly, especially because this is a breed very popular in Texas, are pit bulls with an amazing 27% of dog bites and 61 fatalities in the last 3 years. Following shepherds, not German shepherds who come in 5th, but other shepherds who come in 2nd, and then boxers came in 3rd. I think boxers are kind of cute, but they provide more serious bites when they do bite people. So one of the other caution flags that came with this article is that these breeds also tend to be breeds that are not being inoculated as well as other breeds. Therefore, when they do bite humans, they may convey more serious illnesses from their injuries. So this is a very serious situation. And of course, I'm like any person who believes in pet ownership, It's very important to spay and neuter your pets, and of course to have all of their shots and to control the dogs. Most dogs are not mean by nature, but can be made mean by disgruntled people not treating them well or things like that. And if you do see a neighbor who is not properly treating an animal, certainly call your local animal control people.
All rise.
Our series Interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I'm sure that you will agree that he deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Tyler O'Neill.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. You're the managing editor at the Daily Signal. He's also an author, conservative commentator, has written for numerous publications, including Newsweek, the Washington Times, the Christian Post, National Review, the Washington Free Beacon, and the Hillsdale Collegian. A graduate of Hillsdale College, he also studied journalism at the Leadership Institute and the National Journalism Center. He enjoys Indian food, board games, and talking ceaselessly about politics, religion, and culture. He's the author of 2 books, Making Hate Pay, The Corruption of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and his new book, Woktopus, The Dark Money Cabal Manipulating the Federal Government. We welcome Tyler O'Neill for his first appearance on Saving America.
Thanks, Dr. Schein.
Glad to have you. So, as you know, we asked our guests 3 questions. When did you realize you were conservative at heart, and were there any outside influences that pointed you in that direction?
It's hard to count. So, I mean, I was raised, I like to say I was born in the People's Republic of Boulder, but revolted into orthodoxy in early youth and grew up in Golden. So I was not very far from the Coors factory and knew about the Coors family's generous support for conservative causes for so long. But my dad, my grandma is a, dyed-in-the-wool FDR Democrat. My dad had always been a very rock-ribbed conservative responding to her. So I grew up with an interesting political background between the two of them. And I've always identified as conservative. I've always, felt the call to keep the good things in America and to help it grow. I really hate the way that the left has hijacked the term progressive, because I think progress is a good thing, but it's not. Whenever you want the federal government and the bureaucracy to take over, and in my newest book, I define woke, and one of the aspects of woke is the preference for technocratic government. And the so-called progressive movement is all about a preference for technocrats over the people's elected representatives. And you see that never stronger than in the whole COVID pandemic, when they came out and they said, we lied to you, but we lied to you for good reason, because we were just doing white lies to protect you. And then it's like one thing after another. It was a lie. It was a lie. It was a lie where the origin of COVID was. It was a lie whether masks helped or not. It was a lie, that you should take the vaccine. One thing after another after another. And I think that more than anything else has woken up so many Americans to the threat of this bureaucracy that has been unaccountable, unelected, divorced from the people. And I'm a guy who likes institutions. I'm a natural conservative. I want to trust the experts. But when the experts are pushing things like gender ideology and, critical race theory and climate alarmism, I'm like, no, these people are not real experts. And you have to go back to the real sources of information. You have to question the basic first principles. And you have to go to the source of truth as much as you can. And, I'm a conservative. I've always seen the source of our values being, Judeo-Christian heritage, which I studied a lot at Hillsdale, rooted firmly in the Bible and in Christian tradition and in, so much of the wisdom of the past. And I have a great respect for, I think most of us take modern life for granted. We tend to think, oh, if we were just to throw out the free market, if we were going to, follow Bernie Sanders, we'd still have our iPhones and our, refrigerators and our uh, our microwaves, these small things that we live with, and they were made often in the 50s, but our lives are so infinitely better than they were 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and we just take it utterly for granted that the free market was the thing that enabled us to get there. If we kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, that's going to make things harder for our children, for their children, and for America going forward.
And Tyler and Neil, that is a great metaphor, killing the goose that laid the golden egg, because free enterprise is a flawed system, but boy, it is the best system in the history of the world. And it's so unfortunate that so many of our college students and just people on the street really don't understand that connection. And we want to ask you, that ties in nicely with our second question, with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, that sounds like a harmless legal aid group down somewhere in the deep South, helping, poor people, people who are oppressed, get fair legal treatment. What's the real story behind it that you disclose in your book?
Yeah, thank you. So my book is Making Hate Pay: The Corruption of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I explain how this organization went from that noble mission of representing poor people in the South legally. And they won a lot of really important cases in their early years. They got black men who had been falsely convicted of rape off of death row. And they also, strangely enough, represented a reverse racism case where there were two white guys in a predominantly black situation where they were working, and they got singled out for bad treatment, and the SPLC represented them and got them justice. And so, the SPLC began with this noble mission, but then Morse Dees, the co-founder, who was, is a brilliant fundraiser, he's still with us, but he found he had a personal beef with the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, which of us don't? But in his case, it was his uncle who was a member of the Klan. And he realized that if he went after the Klan, this was in the 1980s, the Klan was mostly a paper tiger. So he could go after the Klan, get a multi-million-dollar judgment. His attorneys said this was like shooting fish in a barrel. And then he could go to his donors, especially Northern liberals, and say, hey, we're fighting those evil bigots in the South, send us money. And there's this really revealing story I tell in the book about a poor black mother who loses her son in a lynching, and the SPLC represents her and gets this big judgment from a group called the United Klans of America. That Klan group, thankfully, it has to close. It's over. It has about 50 grand to its name because it barely exists, right? This is the 1980s. We're not talking 1950s or 1920s. We're talking toward the end of the time. And the SPLC was pretty much putting the final nail in the coffin of these really evil organizations. But, you see the SPLC's corruption even then, because they get this multi-million-dollar judgment against the Klan. Klan group doesn't have $1 million. They don't even have like more than 50 grand. So the 50 grand, that goes to Bula Mae Donald. Meanwhile, the SPLC goes to their donors and says, we got $1 million judgment against the Klan. Look at us. You need to give us money. And they get millions of dollars from their donors. Bula Mae Donald never sees any of that. But what happens to the money that she got in the case? She takes it and pays it to none other than the Southern Poverty Law Center, which had given her a loan for her home. And so this is the example of the SPLC is raking in all this cash, and the poor woman they're supposed to be supporting, they're representing, goes out in the cold. But the real scandal about the SPLC right now is their hate map. They have this hate map where they put mainstream conservative and Christian groups on this map with chapters of the Klan, suggesting that a similar sort of hate drives conservatives who want religious freedom and white supremacists. And they often say, in their reports, they say this map is showing the infrastructure of white supremacy. That's a direct quote from them. Most of these groups have nothing to do with white supremacy. I mean, you also have black supremacist groups on the map. Anyway, so there's a joke for you. But they often are putting people on this map because they disagree with their conservative positions. And it's usually a proxy. So like you have the anti-LGBTQ groups, which are religious freedom organizations. And by the way, they included Gays Against Groomers, which is an LGB organization, as an anti-LGBTQ plus hate group. So that's how seriously we should be taking them. But this, and this ties into my next book, because the SPLC has tremendous amounts of money that they get by scaring their donors into ponying up cash. They're also really useful for the left to demonize conservative opponents of their agenda. And in the last White House, we saw SPLC advising the Department of Education, the Department of Justice. We saw the FBI citing the SPLC on the hate map in particular when they went after radical traditional Catholics. And we saw an SPLC attorney nominated to a top federal judgeship by none other than President Biden. And of course, President Biden had to nominate her twice because her nomination got delayed in the Senate. So this organization has a tremendous amount of clout on the left, and absolutely none of it is deserved. And I had not seen a single book that laid out the case explaining why nobody should trust this organization. So I decided, well, darn it, I want to write that book. And, come hell or high water, I was going to, and I ended up doing it. And I think it's a really important message that we have to keep saying. And by the way, there are 2 live lawsuits. I don't want to go forever on this.
No, we don't, because I want to save time for your new book. But as you know, I said before we began recording that I heard a speech from either the president or their chief legal counsel about a decade ago. And I was ready to toss the fellow out myself, though I'm not a very physical person. Generally don't beat up people. But I thought he was such a clown. And so I great minds think alike. What can I say? So let's move on and talk about that new book. It's a great title. The new book is called Wokeopus. I hope I'm pronouncing that the way you intended. So tell us about the new book and why people should read it.
Yeah, it's Wokeopus, like woke octopus. So I don't know if you remember back, I think it might have been around 10 years ago, they started going after the Koch brothers, and they had books called The Kochtopus. And so this is a play off of that, where I'm showing, and it's the octopus arms over the Capitol building, because they're infiltrating the federal government. And, there are 3 aspects of it. There's the left's dark money network, as I call them. People like George Soros, now Alex Soros is running Open Society Foundations, the Arabella Advisors Network, these people who are sending money to far left activist groups. And then the far left activist groups are then infiltrating and advising the federal government. And this went crazy under Biden. So we saw President Biden nominating many people in high-level, cabinet positions who had either been at unions, who had been at far-left organizations. And of course, nobody represents this better than John Podesta, who was, Bill Clinton's White House chief of staff, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, founder of the Center for American Progress, which is a humongous left-wing activist group that sent, I think it was about 70 people into the Biden administration. And John Podesta was put in charge of determining where all the money went in the Inflation Reduction Act. So
good
we
old
all
John
remember,
Podesta, yes.
Yeah, it's like, and he was on the board of one of these Solyndra-style green boondoggle companies that fell apart.
Yes.
So yeah, I tracked the influence, and that's why, the book on the Southern Poverty Law Center led very naturally into this one, because I saw the weaponization of government against conservatives, and there was a heavy hand of the SPLC in the Biden administration. One other thing I want to mention, because I think it's really interesting, we all remember when Biden declared Transgender Day of Visibility on none other than Easter Sunday. And one of the reasons why I think he did that was because of the impact of the Human Rights Campaign, a group I call the LGBTQ Mafia. Because what they do is they go to corporations, they go to influential people, and they say, look, if you don't toe the line, we're going to sick our activists on you, and we're going to give you a bad score on our corporate equality index. And then what that ends up doing is it tells all the investors who follow the ESG model that they should never put money into these companies. They should blacklist them. And so the Human Rights Campaign had tremendous impact in corporate America. Thankfully, that's largely eroding now, especially with President Trump and his executive orders. A lot of companies have pulled out of the Human Rights Campaign index, which is a really positive step for our country. You know, it's getting business back into the business of business, as opposed to the business of pushing left-wing ideology. And I don't want these groups to be constantly focused on pushing conservative ideology. I want them to be focused on making the best goods for the American people at the lowest price so that we can all benefit as a society. And groups like the Human Rights Campaign are one of the main ones pushing capitalism in this socialist, this very anti-market agenda. But anyway, under Biden, the Human Rights Campaign released this document saying, this is exactly what we want the federal government to do. And Biden essentially said, you want me to jump? How high? And he implemented at least 75% of what the Human Rights Campaign asked for. So I have what I call the Biden Equality Index, where the president scored far too high, and we should all be using that as an albatross around the Democratic Party.
Well, I think given that they're polling between 17 and 21% right now, last I saw, they keep talking about Trump's poll numbers, but the interesting thing is a lot of the media, you mentioned something about language, and I just wanted to mention a couple of things. Progressivism was a positive concept as America turned the corner literally in 1900 with McKinley assassinated, of course. Teddy Roosevelt came in, and that was the birth of progressivism. And it was this launch that allowed America to win 2 world wars and land on the moon first. This current movement, I call them the regressives. I think they're just totally misnomered. And the other term I'm favorite about switching around is the Daily Signal, other publications, the Heritage Society, publications of Hillsdale College, the Imprimis, has 5 million subscribers. And I think that this term mainstream media has been way, way overused. My personal term in social media is slop stream media. And I am still surprised, given that that the largely more conservative media stations have surged in this marketplace over the last few years. Newsmax went public, and they've done very well going public. I mean, incredible numbers. I think that the term mainstream media is definitely way off. And what made me think of it is this term about human rights. And I represent human rights. I am so strongly in favor of human rights, and I don't see anything in the conservative playbook that is contrary to real rights of humans. And it's just sad, because it's like, how can you, Tyler O'Neill, how can you, Dr. Dave Schein, be against human rights? And it's like, well, let's take a look at who's calling what human rights. So love your approach there. And Tyler, as you know, we try and keep this short so that our audience will actually listen to it and then go check out your books. So we appreciate your being here today. Now, how can our audience get more information about you, your writing, and your books?
Thank you. Yeah, you can follow me and the Daily Signal on most social media platforms. We have no truck with TikTok. We have no truck with the Chinese Communist Party. But you can find me on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, at Tyler2 O'Neill. You can find the Daily Signal there. You can find us on Truth Social, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. We're all over the map. You can find The Woktopus and Making Hate Pay on Amazon. The Woktopus just announced, I just released the audiobook version of The Woktopus. So I actually got to record that myself, which was a great experience. But yeah, if you just Google Woktopus, if you don't want to do it through Amazon, you don't have to. But Amazon is, it's also sold pretty much wherever fine books are sold. I Google it occasionally myself, Woktopus, and I find there are even like French and German bookstores that are selling it. So if you just put that word in there, Woktopus, woke octopus, it'll be sure to come up.
Please proceed.
Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. Apple defeats patent lawsuits in Texas over iPhone security systems. This jury decision from a federal court in Austin, Texas, in favor of Apple was a bit of a surprise. In 2021, Identity Security LLC sued Apple for $361 million for infringing 4 U.S. patents involving Apple security systems. The suit alleged that Apple's use of its secure enclave in features like Face ID, Touch ID, and passcode security violated Identity Security's LLC patents. A one-week jury trial was held. The defense firm Desmarais LLP took credit for the win with a press release. It specifically mentioned that part of its win was taking out the key expert witness for the plaintiff. The press release stated that it successfully challenged Identity Security's expert testimony, with the court ruling in favor of Apple's Daubert motion on April 25th, 2024. This key victory excluded Identity Security's expert testimony from the trial, which had formed the basis of its damages theory. A Daubert motion is a common technique in litigation to challenge the credentials of experts who are proposed to testify in various lawsuits. In fact, this reporter has been an expert witness and has been subjected to Daubert motions. It is based on the case Daubert versus Merrill Doll Pharmaceuticals Incorporated, 1993, which held that Rule 702 of the Federal Rules of Evidence was not a fixed standard, but a flexible standard. Basically, the judge makes a decision whether someone presented as an expert by one side or the other will be allowed to actually testify as an expert. The judge is seeking relevant and reliable testimony from the proposed expert. Specifically, the judge must find it more likely than not that the expert's methods are reliable and reliably applied to the facts at hand. It is easy to see how one judge might support an expert's testimony while another judge might not support it. It is unclear at this point if the plaintiff company plans to appeal the jury's verdict, which supported Apple.
How does the defendant plead?
A recent case from a federal court in Oregon is a great reminder of the rules on defamation cases. The background on this case is interesting. Jonathan Tallman owns and operates a coffee shop in a small town in Oregon. In 2019, he had a 16-year-old girl working there, Michaela Miller. Her opinion was that he, Tallman, engaged in inappropriate conduct with her when others were not present. She was involved in high school sports, and she discovered other teammates had experienced similar harassment at the coffee shop. A school coach overheard and, being a mandatory reporter, reported it to the police. The police took statements but did nothing more. Eventually, she quit the job. Starting in 2020, Tallman was an unsuccessful candidate for local office, get this, 4 consecutive years. In August of 2023, a local individual either posted or shared the police report on Facebook. Shortly after, Ms. Miller responded on Facebook with her own posting and later posted it elsewhere. 1 month later, in September 2023, Tallman sued Miller in state court, asserting Oregon common law claims of defamation, defamation per se, and false light invasion of privacy. Miller timely removed the case to federal court and then filed a motion to strike Tallman's case. A federal magistrate, however, agreed with Tallman. Now, that's a first level court. You can take the decision or you can ask for a regular judge to hear the case. That's what happened here. Miller then asked the district court judge to consider the case. The district court cited 1964 SCOTUS case, famous case, New York Times versus Sullivan. In short, for a public figure to be defamed, he or she must prove the false and defamatory statements were published with actual malice, i.e., knowledge of falsity or reckless disregard of the truth. So the question is someone who has not held office, but a recent 4-time candidate, a public figure. The court ruled in this case that Tallman indeed was a public figure. Therefore, he would face a much higher level of proof to prevail in the defamation case. The district court judge went on to indicate that perhaps if Tallman had not been a recent candidate, but decades later the case arose, then the case might be decided differently.
May I remind you, you're still under oath.
China's expanding Arctic ambitions challenge the U.S. and NATO. This is a mega story for the foreseeable future. Xi is an ambitious fool. However, as they say, never take fools lightly. The CCP is doing its best to ruin the economy of mainland China. Showing these displays of force are designed to keep the average person in China focused on something other than the failing economy and the incredible demographic results of the one-child policy. We know that China wants a nuclear sub in the Arctic. If USA and NATO allow this, this could portend a significant change in the balance of power, a change nobody in the free world can allow. The United States needs to exercise its territorial jurisdiction and make sure that doesn't happen.
Order in the court.
Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. We welcome Dom Einhorn for his first appearance on Saving America, who comes to us from his home base in Sarlat, France. Incredibly, at 23, moved to the U.S. and created a successful .com startup. He sold that, and in 2001, he moved back to France. He is a serial entrepreneur and CEO of many companies, including digital media, technology, and others. He speaks an amazing 6 languages, including Alsatian. Among his accomplishments, he's the founder and CEO of Unicorn, that's spelled with a Q. This is the largest rural incubator accelerator in the world. I found so much information on the various companies that he started that I really had to edit this down so I could structure my intro and have time for my 3 questions. We welcome Dom Einhorn for his first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you so much for having me, David. Looking forward to it.
Sounds good. Well, we'll jump right in. With your terrific record, what is your advice for other entrepreneurs out there, especially those who are interested in tech ventures?
Well, as you know, tech is pretty much all I've done my entire life. I don't know how to do anything else. I have a very peculiar interest. I've never golfed in my life. I played darts once in my life against my old partner who challenged me to a game of darts that, by the way, he lost, even though I had never played. So I guess I made my point there. But when it comes to tech, I've been in tech business since 1993. Clearly, tech has evolved dramatically since that time. It's always moved fast, but it tends to move faster and faster. And the closer you seem to be getting to the horizon, the more it shifts away. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would give to any entrepreneur in the space, as well as to any investor, is to not focus on what changes, but instead focus on what does not change. And that's usually where we see the real opportunity. Now, what doesn't change? People tend to change a lot less or a lot less faster than technology does. So communities, for example, when you're building a business, a B2C business, business to consumer business online, for example, you're trying to engage with the people, you're trying to retain people, you're trying to nurture people. That sense of community, in my book, is more important than it's ever been, no matter how much the technology changes, no matter how we engage with people. So the early days of the internet, before the Facebooks, before the Instagrams, before the LinkedIns, before any kind of social media, we had bulletin boards. I'm now talking the years, for those that are old enough to remember, 1992, 1996-ish. We had news groups. people were engaging using primarily text. Then they were engaging using images as the technology would mature. And then in the early to mid 2000s, a little bit of video, more and more video. Now you have TikTok that you guys might be banning soon in the US, which is video only. But at the core of this, despite the technology changing, the willingness of people to engage into meaningful interactions, into conversations, that never changes, never has changed. Storytelling, we've been telling each other stories since the first campfire, I guess, or even before the campfire. That becomes more and more important. So when you're looking at building a business, the best recommendation I could make is focus on what doesn't change, what will be here tomorrow, because none of us have a crystal ball to predict the future.
Well, I think that's very sage advice. And in fact, in order to make sure I made the time this morning, I skipped my technology networker at the new ION Center here in Houston, which is sponsored by Rice University. And it's very interesting to have people like me who are consultants to business meeting with what are, generally speaking, some very young entrepreneurs. Some of them have, college age, a couple even high school age. So it's a very dynamic time in the world. Let's switch gears a little bit here in our question number 2. You are also an active investor in sports franchises, including previously a semi-professional rugby club. What attracts your interest in sports franchises and rugby in particular?
I think it's a great transition from the first question. I don't think there is too much of a dichotomy between the first and the second question. It goes back to community. Where do you find the most engaged communities? The most loyal communities in sports. I talk to you're in Texas, Dallas Cowboy fan, right? Obviously, those go way beyond Texas because we have them in France as well. I grew up as a Raider fan. I still am. Lord forbid, it's been over 20 years since I've had some satisfaction on the field. Yet I'm still a Raider fan. And what attracted me to the Raiders very early on is I was very sensitive to brand. Right. So, for example, here's a brand. Here's a rugby team, our local rugby team in Haguenau, France, right here, for those who have video. Okay. Yeah. And something we're going to talk about a little bit later on the back end. Right. So what's interesting about sports is that you can directly engage with a fan base. You can carry a message that's a sports message, tag along a sponsor message in a very organic way. In a way in which it resonates. So and now I'm talking primarily about amateur sports and semi-professional sports. When you go into pure play pro sports, it tends to get a little different. But at an earlier stage, if you're looking at an amateur sports team, it's typically run like an amateur startup. You have a lot of volunteers, a lot of people that work for free, some of which have been with the team for 30, 40 years. They only have the team's best interest in mind, clearly, because they're not getting paid. Yes. They're diehard fans. They will do anything for this team to, in many cases, survive because the team has very little in terms of means. And then as a corporate brand, you can identify these niches, these pockets of opportunity, step in, sometimes for very little money, and help that team grow while growing your own brand. So the local team here in Haguenau, northeastern France, we've been with now for just a little over a year, that we invested in. We completely redid their entire brand, their jerseys, the derivative products, like the one that's right on this table here, mouse pads, bags, jerseys, the whole gamut, with a redrawn brand, which is their own, which is a historic brand. The club's been around for 50 years. And tag along our brand, Masters of Trivia, and growing them together in a very symbiotic way. Every time their brand is shown, ours is shown. Every time ours is shown, theirs is shown. It's also shown in a way that's engaging to the fan base, that's engaging to the press. So every Sunday, typically, or every Monday, sorry, because the games are on Sunday, the weekend games are covered in the press, on social media, and you can measure the impact that you have for your own brand, and you can measure the ROI, the return on investment, or what we call the return on brand, the ROB. You can measure it down to the dollar. There's software today that allows you to see how many times the human eye on social media or when they're looking up the pictures of the weekend game has seen your brand and put a value on that and calculate what the ROI is depending on the ad spend that you allocated towards that effort. And what we found out, and that's to answer the second part of the question, why rugby, is that if you look at sports in general, according to our research, internal research, and we spent a lot of time on that, the number one sport in the world in terms of ROI, sponsorship ROI, is ping pong, table tennis.
Okay.
When we saw that, we were like, wait a second, how is that? And I have a late brother who was a businessman as well. He would only sponsor table tennis, and he had told me this already 10, 15 years ago, and I kind of brushed it by the wayside and said that he probably had one too many drinks to tell me this today because it was on a weekend. And it turns out it was right. So but very often it's due to extreme examples. So let's take one example. During COVID, we all remember COVID.
Yes.
We all remember that all sports games were literally banned as a result of human contact. When that happened, in places like ESPN, pure play sports channels panic, right? We had all these games planned. Now we got nothing to show. What do we show? What's going on? What do we have in our library? What can we show the people? What's engaging? Oh, we have the World Championship from ping pong from last year. Ping pong is always interesting to watch for anyone, whether we like it or not, right? But now behind that table with the camera angle straight on it, you have now a game that's never been seen before where 2, 3, 4 million people per week watch now these World Championship tennis ping pong organization, and the sponsor behind the table spent $3,000 to have their sign there and getting millions of dollars worth of exposure. So you have dramatic ROI, dramatic ROB, return on brand, as a result of this once in a lifetime lucky event. Lucky, I put this in brackets clearly because it was during COVID. The second sport that comes close to ping pong is rugby. Here I'm going to take another example, driven purely by metrics. If you're looking, for example, at the French national soccer team, as you call it in the US, soccer versus football, even though we play with a foot, you typically, now we have the Euro Cup going on as we speak. France is qualified for the round of 16, which they will play on Monday against Belgium. There will be roughly 12 to 15 million people, French people, watching that game, give or take. The rugby team tonight, which is the final between Toulouse and Bordeaux for what's called top 14, top tier, the equivalent of the NFL in the US, will be roughly watched by 8 million people. So give or take a little bit more than half the soccer. But the 30-second TV spot on the soccer game costs 50 times more than the 30-second spot on the rugby game.
Fantastic.
Why is that? Major delta. Well, the reason is what we call in the advertising business the upfronts. The first one is sold upfront, as the name indicates, ahead of time, a year ago, just like the Super Bowl spots that are going for $7 million a piece.
Right.
Where all of the big brands, primarily consumer brands, the Procter & Gamble's of the world, the largest advertising spender in the world, will outbid each other to be in that spot because there's a finite amount of those 30-second spots to buy.
Absolutely.
The rugby is not sold this way. It's on a first come, first sold basis. So you don't have this inflation going on, yet you're reaching the exact same person, the exact same butt is sitting in front of the TV station, in this case mine. I will be watching both games. So why is it that my butt in the chair watching the football game, the soccer game, costs 50 times more than my butt in the chair watching the rugby game? It makes no sense whatsoever. The impression is exactly the same. So we're looking for these opportunities. And in amateur sports, you have massive opportunity for investment. I would recommend any serious brand that's looking to generate positive, strong ROI on their brand to follow a similar path. If you need help with how to do it, you can contact me.
That is incredible. And by the way, Houston, Texas, where I am, has just announced that, and it's out in a suburban location, is the Houston SaberCats.
I follow them. I follow them on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah. So they are, and I met with their. He's now part of my LinkedIn loop. Is their head of promotion. So it's interesting because it's just hitting in Houston also. Let's move on to number 3. One of your newest ventures ties in with the growing interest in trivia. Tell us about Masters of Trivia, which I hear you put on a shelf 20 years ago, but you booted it up last year. And of course, you showed us your drinking bottle next to you with the Masters of Trivia on it.
Yeah, this one right here.
Right.
So trivia is very interesting. It's a very interesting topic. I've been a trivia fanatic since a very early age. I used to compete in quiz contests in a format where you'd get hit up on any topic in 5 different languages. You wouldn't know which topic would come next and in which language it would come to you. So it's the ultimate in terms of multitasking. But at the most granular level, what's really exciting and fascinating about trivia, it's the core unit of knowledge. In other words, if we're looking at our own discovery path online, if we have a question in our minds today, what we do is we typically type it into Google. If we're looking for George Washington's birthday, we're going to take the answer because it's going to be immediate, boom, and we're going to be happy with that because it's the only thing we're looking for. But if we're looking for Ronald Reagan's curriculum, we're going to have to dig deeper. We're going to see his birthday. We're going to click likely on Wikipedia giving us an encyclopedia knowledge on pretty much anything. And that we're going to sift through and maybe find what we're looking for, maybe not. In all likelihood, we will find it. However, there is a missing piece to the puzzle, which is how do we test our own knowledge against any topic? What if we had a de facto Wikipedia-like resource that allows us at the most granular level, be it a butterfly, a bird, an American president, a football team, an obscure topic in another language, a systematic way of testing our knowledge on that topic, learning as we go in a gamified way. This is really what we're setting up to do, basically helping the world become smarter on any topic. Today, you may have seen it earlier today, we celebrated Mike Tyson's ear biting of Evander Holyfield, which happened on June 28th, 1997, believe it or not, 27 years ago. So for those who remember that event, you know, that was almost 30 years ago, 27 years ago today. So in this case, we use that as the hook. You know, it's a bite, but you know, we can call it a hook, a marketing hook to draw people in. Oh yeah, I remember this event. And then here is a 23, in this case, a 23 question quiz about Mike Tyson. You can test your knowledge about what you remember about him, what you know about him. But the objective is to do this on millions of topics, on any topic under the sun, in any language under the sun. So it's an absolute massive undertaking. On the same lines, we're organizing the first European Quiz Championships. I don't think I mentioned this to you, but this is an event.
I haven't heard this yet. Go ahead.
I will invite you to. It will take place in our neck of the woods here in northeastern France in Alsace. The website is currently under construction. It will be quiz67.com. 67 is the name of our department. France is divided by departments. And it will bring together over a Saturday, Sunday, players from around the world, primarily European, that will compete on Saturday in a confined environment in the massive sports hall against each other. And then on Sunday, the following day, we will open up the winners who will then compete against the rest of the world in a hybrid format, both online and in the physical presence, with a massive screen where people can follow what's going on. We're going to provide more context prior to every quiz contest, meaning that if you're playing a quiz about the Civil War, you will get a 3-minute clip playing first to draw the people in, to give them more context, rather than taking the average Frenchman who knows nothing about the Civil War and just parachuting them into a quiz about the Civil War, which would make no sense.
Yeah.
And we're going to do this in French, in German, in English, and in Alsatian, which is our local language.
Yes.
So that's going to be the gist of the event. But coming back to the trivia itself, it's also a massive business opportunity, which ties together with your first and your second question. In other words, tech, sports, and masters of trivia. How do they all tie together? Well, if you can target a user down to the most granular level, and you look at these unit economics, and you're taking, knowing that you can create a quiz on any topic under the sun, in any language under the sun, you can pick any. You can drive community to that topic, because no matter how targeted that interest is, let's say fly fishing, not in general, but fly fishing in northeastern Montana, you will have a community of fly fishermen in northeastern Montana that you can target with a quiz that's specifically built for that purpose. And then you can tie in local guides, fly fishermen from northeastern Montana that will want to sponsor that quiz with pinpoint accuracy, content and context. When you're going to that guide, today, he's probably using some Facebook ads, he's probably using some Google ads, maybe some other venues, but very often he's challenged to find the right medium that is perfectly aligned with his line of business. That is no longer the problem here with what we're setting up to do. We can give him the perfect context and the perfect content and align them both together and make them both resonate without turning off the user. Because if you're, as we all know, very often when we like content, we're annoyed by the advertising that's superimposed on top of that content.
Absolutely.
But if that content, if that context is perfectly aligned with the content, if I'm playing that fly fishing trivia quiz about Montana, and the ad that's rolling right next to it is a fly fisherman from northeastern Montana, I'm not going to be turned off by it. I might actually click on it. I might actually contact it.
Dom, we could do this for hours. As you know, we talked before we began recording, and we have so much to talk about. But like I said, we try and keep this to a certain length so that people actually watch this fascinating interview. I know I'm looking forward to seeing this again. Tell people, how can they get more information about you? Where should they go?
Probably the easiest way is the way you found me, is on LinkedIn. So
okay,
I believe I'm the only Dom Einhorn, D-O-M, not Don, not with an N, with an M like Mary, Einhorn, yes. E-I-N-H-O-R-N. And from there on, you'll find the links to Masters of Trivia, our website, and everything else.
This session is adjourned.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.